Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, we would love you to. And you can do so at patreon.com/the History Network. Thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, season 35, episode 8, The Roman Empire's Darkest Day, Disaster at the Battle of Adrianople, 9th of August, AD 378, Part 1. This episode was written by Murray Darm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is, of course, a regular writer on here and a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. In AD 376, an entire nation of Goths, the Theruingi, gathered on the northern banks of the Danube and asked permission to enter and settle within the Eastern Roman Empire. The Eastern Emperor Valens, who reigned from 364 to 378, agreed, and this set off a series of events which would end in the greatest disaster for Rome since Cannae in 216 BC. The Battle of Adrianople, fought on the 9th of August AD 378. Some even say that this defeat precipitated the fall of the Roman Empire. Untangling what actually happened at Adrianople has, however, caused historians headaches for more than 1600 years. Peoples from across the Rhine and Danube had asked to be settled within the Roman Empire before. The scale of the migration in 376, however, was unprecedented. Only one source gives us a number. Eunapius tells us 200,000 people of the Theruingi, under the leadership of Alavivus and Fritigern, asked to be settled in Thrace and offered to become troops in Roman armies in return. According to the historian Zosimus, they offered to be a bulwark against a new people forcing various tribes westward from the east, the Huns. The most likely place for the crossing was Durostorum, modern Silistra, Bulgaria, and the Theruingi would be followed across the Danube by more tribes and confederations in close succession. These were not pagan barbarians, however. In the 360s, large numbers of Goths had converted to Arian Christianity. This was the faith of Valens too, and may have been part of the reason for his allowing the Goths to cross into the empire. At the time, Valens was in the middle of a divisive and bloody conflict within the Christian Church. His Arian faith battled, quite literally, with the Nicene faith. Following Valens's death at Adrianople, he was replaced by the Nicene Emperor Theodosius. When the request came, Valens was at Antioch preparing for yet another campaign against the Sasanian Persians. In his stead, two Roman commanders, the commes, Lupicinus and Dux Maximus, were appointed to oversee Gothic resettlement. Unfortunately, these two men mistreated the Goths to such a degree that the Goths broke out into open rebellion at Marcianopolis, modern Devnia, Bulgaria, capital of Moesia Secunda, led by Fritigern, who had apparently escaped an assassination plot in Marcianopolis itself. The Goths overcame the Roman forces. The latter seriously underestimated the capabilities of the Goths. The victorious Goths equipped themselves from the fallen Romans, and the rebellion spread, the Goths overrunning Thrace and taking refuge in the Haemus Mountains. In 377, new commanders and a new army were sent against the Goths. Valens was still preoccupied with preparations for his Persian campaign in Antioch, however. The new force met with no more success, and they were fought to a standstill at a place called the Willows, the site of which has defied identification, and the Goths also won another engagement at Dibaltum, near modern Debelt, Bulgaria. The Romans had some success against isolated contingents of Goths, such as the Typhali at Berea, probably modern Varia in northern Greece. The Romans, however, then withdrew, and the Goths overran more territory, reaching as far as the Hellespont and the Rhodope Mountains. The Gothic rampage continued in 378, and finally Valens moved with his forces from Antioch back to Constantinople to deal with a threat which had proved much more serious than he imagined. The ecclesiastical historian Socrates tells us that Valens reached Constantinople on May 30th and marched out against the Goths on June 11th. Valens still underestimated the threat, however, and would try to decide the matter without waiting for reinforcements from his nephew Gratian, Emperor of the West. The Goths were ravaging the countryside near Adrianople, modern Edirne, Merkez, Turkey, when Valens marched out to face them. His commander was Sebastianus, appointed Magister Militum and given command for the whole war. Sebastianus was a general of well-known vigilance, according to the historian Ammianus, our main account of the battle, although Ammianus eventually comes to blame him for the loss. Sebastianus would die on the battlefield of Adrianople and was probably used as a scapegoat for the mistakes which led to the disaster. We gain more information and a universally positive picture of Sebastianus, where he is not blamed for the defeat, from both Zosimus and Eunapius. Cautioned by successful ambushes of his raiding bands in June and July, Fritigern recalled his bands to Kabyle, modern Kabylie, Bulgaria, and withdrew from the area. Gratian wrote to Valens informing his uncle of his own victory over the Alemanni and telling him that he was on his way to assist him against the Goths. Valens was probably jealous of his younger nephew's successes and probably wanted to achieve a success on his own that would rival Gratian's. That jealousy was not the only one at play. Sebastianus was now slandered at the court of Valens, probably on account of his successes, especially as the commanders defeated in the previous 2 years were still present. First among the slanderers was Traianus, the commander who had been bested at the Willows and whom Sebastianus had replaced. Valens marched from the imperial villa of Melantus, located between 102 and 140 stadia, 18 to 26 kilometers, from Constantinople, eager to perform some exploit equal to that of Gratian. Ammianus gives little detail of the army Valens took with him, only that it was numerous and was composed of different elements, including veterans and several men of high rank, including Traianus. Valens's army probably consisted of parts of the Comitatus Praesentalis, the army in the imperial presence, units of the Comitatus of Thrace, as well as the units of imperial Scolae cavalry. Included among these may have been the remainder of Sebastianus's army of 7 legions, the Armenian legions brought by Traianus in 377, and even some of the Limitani units from Maesia Secunda and Scythia, all of which supported the idea of a large Roman force. According to Ammianus, the Goths now advanced slowly over unfamiliar terrain until they were 24 kilometers from Constantinople and heading towards Nice in Thrace, near modern Hasva, Turkey. There they were spotted, and Valens was assured by his scouts that his body of Goths only numbered 10,000 men. He may have assumed that this was the entire Gothic force, but if he did, this was a mistake. It seems clear that this number was only a portion of the Goths, not the whole nation on the move, and that their actual number was much greater. The incident also points to the fact that Roman reconnaissance was at best incomplete and haphazard, especially if they had only found a portion of the Gothic force in 3 days of searching. Learning that the Goths numbered only 10,000 men, Valens determined to attack them himself at once. Valens advanced in battle array, possibly a square formation. Ammianus uses the term agmine quadrato, and made his way towards the city of Adrianople. This apparent organized advance is contradicted by other accounts. Zosimus tells us that Valens led his army in complete disarray. Reaching Adrianople, Valens made a strong camp and impatiently waited for Gratian. Rycomeres, the Western Comes Domesticorum and one of Gratian's most trusted commanders, arrived from the west. He had been sent the year before as well, no doubt bringing some troops with him, and a letter from Gratian stating that he would soon arrive. This news only encouraged Valens to decide things on his own as soon as possible. He called a council of his commanders and sought reassurance that he should attack alone so that he would not have to share the glory with his nephew. Ammianus blames these advisers, especially Sebastianus, for encouraging Valens to fight alone and at once. In Zosimus, however, Sebastianus advised that Valens should avoid open battle against so numerous an enemy. Instead, he encouraged the continuing use of ambushes. Valens, however, insisted on fighting alone, which suggests that the whole meeting was arranged simply to rubber-stamp the emperor's decision. Valens's decision to fight was a fatal obstinacy, and it was supported by his flattering courtiers, according to Ammianus 31:12-7. As preparations for Valens's advance began, a priest sent as an envoy to discuss peace arrived from Fritigern. This was the first of several envoys sent by Fritigern, and they have been accepted at face value by modern historians of the battle. Many of the reconstructions of Adrianople are relatively straightforward tales of Roman defeat, a succession of mistakes, and underestimating their enemy. Much more seems to have been going on, however, and we should put just as much emphasis on the fact this was a Gothic victory as it was a Roman defeat. The Goths, and Fritigern especially, seemed to have been the agents of their own success. They were not simply the fortunate bystanders of Roman mistakes. It is more probable, with the series of envoys Fritigern sent, for instance, that he was playing for time and using envoys to give his troops time to execute a premeditated plan, one he would deliver masterfully at precisely the right moment. Fritigern is often described in the sources which mention him as cunning and crafty, yet no modern commentator has seen any deliberate Gothic stratagems at play at Adrianople. It has been viewed as a series of Roman errors rather than any particular Gothic successes. No ancient account or modern reconstruction of the battle has considered that Valens played into Fritigern's hands at Adrianople, or that Fritigern deliberately tricked a Roman emperor eager to prove himself on the battlefield. The battle is a Roman defeat, but it is not presented as a Gothic victory. This is despite the fact that there were other Gothic stratagems, real and suspected, and all probably Fritigern's initiatives, performed since 376 and even after Adrianople. Fritigern's envoy priest presented a letter requesting that the Goths be given all of Thrace as land to occupy. If this request was granted, the Goths promised perpetual peace. At the same time, the priest delivered a secret letter to Valens in which Fritigern claimed to look forward to being Valens's friend and ally. It claimed, however, that Fritigern could not control the ferocity of his people unless the emperor on occasion showed them an army close at hand. This seems to be a deliberate ploy by Fritigern to persuade Valens to bring his army close to the Gothic wagon laager, perhaps because the Gothic leader had already set his overridden stratagem in motion. The letter claimed that such an act by Valens would frighten the Goths into submission. The envoy was dismissed and looked on with suspicion by Valens, but the army set out for the Gothic laager on the following morning nonetheless. Valens would, in fact, do exactly as the secret letter had suggested, and led an armed Roman force close to the Gothic wagon laager. Valens and the Romans were, perhaps unwittingly, playing into Fritigern's hands. The Roman army set out towards the Gothic wagon laager from Adrianople on the morning of 9th of August AD 378. All baggage was left close to Adrianople with a suitable guard, along with the treasury, the praetorian prefect, and the emperor's council. Valens believed he had more than enough men at his disposal to make a show, or indeed defeat, the Goths. Valens marched over rough ground towards the Goths in the heat of the late morning. Ammianus tells us that Valens advanced octavo, eighth, but eighth what? Some editors have chosen to amend this to octavo ora, so it reads eighth hour, or about 2 p.m. This, however, contradicts Ammianus's own statement that the army marched towards noon in the same sentence. The octavo therefore seems to be one of distance, not time, suggesting that Ammianus meant Valens marched to the 8th milestone from Adrianople. Hydatius's chronicle entry for 378 refers to a distance of 12 Roman miles from Adrianople. This gives modern scholars a band of almost 13 to 20 kilometres from Adrianople in an arc from north to east to look for the battle site. That search has been ongoing for more than a century, and there remain several candidates, each with reasons to accept and reject them. A secure site for the Battle of Adrianople has continued to defy identification. Several locations have been suggested, north, northeast, and directly east of Adrianople, although there is no consensus among modern authors. The first location lies north of Adrianople between the Hebrus River, the modern Merister Merich Evos, to the west, and the Tonsos Tunza River to the east. The second location also lies north of Adrianople, but further east, to the east of the river Tonsos Tunza, near the modern town of Muretzali. A third location east of the city is near the modern Turkish town of Demirhanli, first proposed in 1903. There are several criteria which any suggested battle site must meet. With the interpretation of the battle offered here, however, none of the currently proposed sites do. Sozomen wrote that the Goths encamped in a secure position, meaning on a hill. Sozomen is the only authority to give us this detail, but it seems a sound one. We are told that the Goth laager was on a hill before the willows, and that there the Goths sought a hill to give impetus to their downhill charge. Ammianus records that the returning Gothic cavalry descended from the mountains like a thunderbolt, suggesting that there was higher ground close to the Gothic laager from which the cavalry could charge. Most modern reconstructions have the Gothic cavalry charge from the Gothic right wing, but here I would argue that they came from the left, so the higher ground should be sought there and not on the Gothic right. In addition to the distances in Ammianus and Hydateus, a dry plain nearby on which the Goths lit their fires should also form part of the location on a hot summer day in August. Well, thank you, Murray, for writing that episode for us. We will continue with part 2 of this fascinating story in a couple of weeks' time. If you'd like to have a go at writing an episode for us, or you want to contact us and give us an idea for a subject that you think we've not covered yet, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org for that. And once again, please do consider becoming a patron of the podcast at patreon.com/thehistorynetwork. Once again, thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Dahm, read by Nick Barker.